How's it going, everyone? It's Salvi from Weather 1000. Today is June 7th, 2020, as we're approaching the final hours before landfall for Tropical Storm Cristobal, which is currently only probably about 1 to 2 hours away from landfall just south of the Louisiana coast. And it's moving north at 12 miles per hour, so at a pretty fast pace, so it should make landfall within the next couple hours. And you see that wind field, despite only being a relatively weak 50 mile per hour storm with a millibar pressure of 993, that wind field is quite large for a tropical storm, as you would expect a wind shear this large during a hurricane, but we're seeing it for a tropical storm. And that's worrying for the Gulf of Mexico because, like I said, that increases the storm surge threat because the wind pretty much has more time to pile up a bunch of water along the coast. And we have been experiencing a lot of storm surge throughout the Gulf Coast, which is very prone to storm surge, even during weaker storms. As we take a look at the public cam for Mississippi, I think Gulfport, Mississippi, at Beach Boulevard, you see that they're already experiencing flooding along the roads. It might not just be the storm surge 100%. It might be the rainfall and the storm surge combined creating this flooding in the streets. So if you're along the coast, if you're very close along the coast, from pretty much from the Gulf Coast of Alabama, Mississippi, and even Louisiana, definitely prepare for storm surge as your basements might be prone to flooding during an event like this. And then if we take a look at the water vapor imagery, you see that it doesn't really look that organized. It doesn't look much of a tropical storm. Like if I showed this satellite imagery to regular meteorologists with zero context, they would probably suspect that this could almost be interpreted as an upper level low or just a regular low pressure system that might have a chance of developing into a tropical depression or storm. But this is a tropical storm with 50 mile per hour winds. There isn't much convection around the center, which is at this point around here. While the rotation is visible, the lack of convection makes it seem like it's a very weak storm, and it is. It's a 50 mile per hour storm. However, I want to emphasize that the wind field of this is large, largely due to this low pressure pretty much being formed out of a gyre, pretty much, and pretty much getting a lot of its intense winds from this upper level trough combined with a ridge that's just to the north and east of it, which is creating those stronger and a larger wind field on the eastern side, especially of the storm. And it even extends to the western side, where we have tropical storm warnings issued all throughout the coast, like the forecast states, where we see tropical storm warnings extend from pretty much midway through the Louisiana coast all the way to the Florida Panhandle, as wind gusts over tropical storm force are likely in all those regions. And you might be wondering what are the current winds for this area, and you can see this as of 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 12 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and you can see that just south of New Orleans, we're seeing winds around the 20 mile per hour range, but I would say that the winds are gusting over tropical storm force in a lot of these areas. And but where you see the highest winds, which is interesting, is right around the Mobile area and to the extreme eastern portions of Mississippi. And it's the result of the winds on the eastern side being a lot stronger thanks to this the trough that was bringing it up north. And since this storm was moving up north along with this trough, that means that the winds are more likely to be on the eastern portion of the storm. And those winds, and I would expect that for at least on the wind side, this is only the beginning for the Gulf Coast like Mississippi and Alabama, because once that eye passes through and makes landfall in Louisiana, we will see those winds extend and become stronger as we head into next 6 hours once that storm makes landfall, where the Gulf Coast will experience the strongest of the eastern side of this storm. However, I wouldn't expect this to be a major wind threat. I would just suggest that if you have like loose things or that could easily be blown around and stuff, I would suggest that you take those inside, because those could be flying projectiles that could potentially damage your property or even hurt someone. So definitely make sure those loose things are inside along the Gulf Coast from Louisiana all the way to the Florida Panhandle, because those winds could gust in localized areas over 50 miles per hour. And let's take a look at the current rainfall that's so far that this storm has dropped over the past day. And while it hasn't really dropped much in around the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and Louisiana and even Alabama, as you can see, they're mostly shaded in the blues, with the very extremely coastal portions of the areas getting at least 1 inch. However, I expect those rainfall totals to definitely increase to maybe 2 to 4 inches, pretty much northeast of New Orleans and pretty much all throughout the Mississippi Gulf Coast and maybe the Alabama Gulf Coast. Because if we take a look at the water vapor imagery again, you see that while there is convection currently impacting the coast right now and there's a lot of rain bands, you see that just to the east of the eye right now, you see those thunderstorms beginning to develop, and it seems like these thunderstorms will eventually hit land and will dump a lot more rain. And I've been noticing over the past several hours, we've been seeing overall more convection from Cristobal, which would represent that this storm is strengthening. However, I don't expect it to strengthen any more than what it is right now as a 50-mile-per-hour storm. And it's mainly because this really won't have enough time over water. Like, the computer models were suggesting that this will develop into a 60-mile-per-hour storm before it made landfall, but it seemed like Cristobal moved a little bit too fast and the wind field was just a little bit too large for the energy to pretty much be tightened into one area of the center of circulation, which pretty much made Cristobal remain as a 50-mile-per-hour storm. And as of right now, even though it's definitely starting to strengthen its convection and its core, I think it's just too late for this thing to develop any longer, since it's barely gonna be over water anymore, only about 1 to 2 hours before it makes landfall. So that's the good news, it won't strengthen. However, the bad news is this increase in convection will increase the rainfall and the inland flooding as well. And if we take a look at the current forecast in terms of flooding, you see that the oranges represent minor flooding, the reds represent moderate flooding, and then the yellows represent near flood stage. So for the most part, at least throughout the Mississippi Gulf Coast and throughout the eastern portion of Louisiana, the good news is that it's not really major flooding. It's mainly minor flooding, which still definitely could cause impacts, don't get me wrong. However, it won't impact a large area, let's say, that could impact potentially thousands of people more if it were like a moderate to major flooding threat. However, we do see some dots that represent that moderate flooding is expected. So if you're in a flood zone and you know moderate flooding could impact your house, definitely prepare for that, because you don't want to take any chances with water, as flooding is unfortunately the highest cause of death during tropical cyclones. So definitely watch out if flooding is expected, whether it's minor, whether it's moderate, or whether even if it's near flood stage, because these forecasts could easily be wrong at the same time. we could easily see more rain than expected. The hopeful thing is that we see less rain than expected. However, if you're at least near flood state, in a near flood stage area, I suggest prepare now, and it's better to be safe than sorry, and it could potentially save a life. So let's take a look at the current radar right now over the Louisiana and Mississippi Gulf Coast. And right now you could see that you see those extra thunderstorm bands that are those squall lines that are currently marching their way onto the Gulf Coast and will potentially create a flash flooding threat throughout the Gulf Coast, which is definitely a worry if you're in those creeks. While you might not experience a long-term river flooding, flash flooding is an entirely different scenario that could affect anyone within like a small creek. So definitely watch out, because those squall lines are really looking strong. You see that just south of Mobile, those are that's a very heavy rainfall squall line, and you see that just south of it, you see those thunderstorms starting to develop, and I would suspect that it's going to continue throughout the next several hours. And then just east of New Orleans, we also see pretty long area of squall lines. However, the good news is that there's a lot of dry air infiltrating this tropical storm, so it won't be as big of a flood threat. However, it's still likely in many areas throughout the Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama Gulf Coast will experience some sort of flooding from this event. If we take a look at the Futurecast Radar, let this load up real quick. You see that those squall lines will eventually impact land, and we will see an enhanced flooding threat. And you see that convection over the next several hours increases as Cristobal gets its act together just before it makes landfall. And even as it makes landfall, we're seeing that convection increase, and we're seeing a lot of rain throughout Gulfport, as I would expect around 2 to 4 inches of additional rainfall to impact this area. And this rain even extends all the way to Mobile, and we even see some squall lines extending all the way to the panhandle of Florida. And we've already seen a lot of rain throughout Florida during this event. If we take a look at the past rainfall over the past 24 hours, we see that a lot of Florida experienced 2 to 4 to even 4 to 8 inches of rain in localized areas just because of this event. And I expect that Mississippi and Louisiana will experience the same as the storm approaches the coast in the next hour or two. So definitely watch out if you're along the rivers in the Gulf Coast. And as for the long-term future of this storm, it will eventually potentially bring flooding even far beyond its landfall, as it maintains its depression strength and its rainfall. And this storm will somehow be enhanced by this trough that's coming through, that's going to enhance the thunderstorm activity of this storm despite making landfall, and could create a flash flooding event throughout the Mississippi River Valley, extending all the way to Wisconsin and maybe Canada as we go into Wednesday. So definitely watch out for that. So to pretty much conclude this video, for those like in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, I wish you guys the best. Prepare now. As long as you make sure you're educated on your flood zones, and make sure to bring those loose things inside, you should be okay, because the good news is it is a relatively weak storm. However, I wouldn't really underestimate it at the same time, because this does have a large wind field, and like the public cameras are showing, there is storm surge flooding you could experience along the coast, as well as inland flooding. Perfect example is that Hurricane Harvey in 2017, throughout its whole time over Houston, was a tropical storm, but dumped 60 inches of rain and was one of the most costliest disasters in U.S. history, just off of being a tropical storm and staying over the same area alone. This is nowhere near Harvey. I don't want to say that, but still, my point is that don't underestimate these storms just because they're weak, because they could still dump a lot of rain and create an abundance of flooding throughout your area. So keep in mind of that. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more content, and I hope you guys have a great day.